Nobody in that hospital lobby believed a woman covered in a police officer's blood, wearing a biker patch on her back, had done anything except cause the wound herself. They were wrong. And by the time the sun came up, the same cops who'd put a gun to her head were standing in silence, showing her the kind of respect none of them ever expected to give an outlaw. Rain hammered the industrial stretch of the city's east side, washing oil and cigarette butts into gutters that hadn't been cleaned in a decade. It was just past 3 in the morning, the specific hour when the only people still awake were either getting paid or getting into trouble. Kes Larrabee fell somewhere in between, though tonight she was simply trying to get home. She rode her Harley lowrider down the cracked asphalt toward the underpass on 4th, the engine's low growl swallowed almost entirely by the rain. She was soaked through despite her leather cut, running on maybe 3 hours of sleep after a chapter meeting that had gone 2 hours longer than it needed to. The patch on her back. Iron Wolves MC, the wolf's head stitched in faded silver thread, felt heavier tonight than it usually did. She wanted her bed and nothing else. She took the shortcut under the old rail overpass out of habit rather than any conscious decision. The same route she'd ridden 100 times before. No streetlights down there, no cell signal, just concrete pillars and the smell of standing water. It was usually empty at this hour. Tonight it wasn't. She saw the strobe first, red and blue light bouncing weakly off the concrete. Not the sharp, aggressive pulse of an active traffic stop, but something dimmer, more erratic, the specific flicker of a system running on a dying battery. Kes rolled off the throttle and let the bike coast, boots dragging against wet pavement, until she came to a stop. A patrol cruiser sat wrapped around one of the support pillars, its front end crushed like a beer can, steam hissing up from a ruptured radiator in a thick white column. The driver's door hung open on a bent hinge. Kes killed her engine, and the silence that followed felt enormous, broken only by the hiss of steam, the drumming rain, and a faint electronic crackle from somewhere inside the wreck. Every instinct she'd built over 15 years in the club told her to get back on the bike and ride away. Bikers and cops didn't mix. You didn't stop for the other side. You didn't leave your prints anywhere near a wrecked cruiser at 3 in the morning. She reached for her ignition. Then she heard it. The scrape of a boot against concrete, 10 feet from the open door. Kes swore under her breath and kicked the stand down anyway. She approached slowly, the deliberate pace of someone who half expected a trap. It was a cop, young, barely out of the academy by the look of him, his uniform torn and soaked through with rain and something darker underneath. He was slumped against the base of the pillar, one hand pressed hard against his abdomen, the other shaking violently as he tried to bring his service weapon up. "Stop," he rasped, the word nearly lost under the rain. Kes looked down the barrel of the gun, shaking so badly he couldn't have hit a parked car with it. "Put it down, kid," she said, flat and even. "You pull that trigger, the recoil alone is going to put you in shock." He didn't lower it. His eyes, glassy and wide, tracked to the patch on her jacket. "Back off," he choked, blood at the corner of his mouth. "Gladly," Kes said, raising her hands in mock surrender and taking a step back. "I'll leave you here to bleed out. Have a good night, officer." She made it 3 steps before she heard the gun clatter to the pavement behind her. She stopped, closed her eyes, tilted her face up into the rain and silently asked whatever was listening why tonight, of all nights, this was happening to her. If you're already wondering how this story ends, stay with us, because what happens over the next several hours is something an entire police precinct still talks about, and what almost nobody in that hospital lobby understood in the moment it was actually happening. She turned back. He'd collapsed fully now, cheek resting against the wet concrete. Kes kicked the gun out of reach and dropped to one knee beside him, the cold soaking instantly through her jeans. Up close, the damage was worse than she'd first registered. The windshield was peppered with bullet holes, tight-grouped, deliberate. This hadn't been an accident. Someone had boxed this cruiser in and lit it up. She pulled his hands away from his stomach. He groaned, a deep, involuntary sound. "Hold still," she said, peeling back the Kevlar vest with practiced efficiency. The entry point sat just below the armor line on his left side, steady dark blood welling up. Liver, maybe spleen. She wasn't a doctor, but she'd seen enough gunshot wounds over the years to recognize the difference between minutes and hours. He had minutes. She checked her burner phone. No signal. The cruiser's radio was shattered plastic and dead sparks. "Where's your partner?" she asked, pressing her palm hard against the wound. "Riding solo," he gasped, back arching off the pavement. "Brilliant," Kess muttered, pressing harder. Blood welled warm between her fingers. "Okay, look at me." His eyelids fluttered. She tapped his cheek. "Hey, look at me. What's your name?" "Theo," he managed. "All right, Theo. You're dying." She didn't soften it. She'd never believed comforting lies did anyone any good in a moment like this one. "Ambulance isn't coming. Nobody knows you're down here." A tear cut through the grime on his face as the words landed. "I'm putting you on my bike," Kess said, low and steady. "It's going to hurt like hell. You're going to hate me for it. But you stay here. You're a chalk outline by sunrise. Understand?" He gave a faint nod. "Good." She stripped off her belt. "Try not to scream. Gives me a headache." Getting him onto the low rider was a brutal exercise in physics and pain. Kess was strong, but dead weight combined with the need to keep constant pressure on a gut wound made every motion a negotiation between speed and injury. She hauled him upright, arm locked around his waist, hand pinned against the wound, and he screamed, a raw, tearing sound that bounced off the concrete pillars and vanished into the rain. His knees buckled. She took his full weight, boots slipping on the wet asphalt. I know, she grunted, dragging him the last few feet. Almost there. She swung her leg over the saddle and hauled him up behind her. He slumped forward against her back, already trembling with the early stages of shock. "Wrap your arms around me," she ordered. His arms slid uselessly off her jacket. He didn't have the strength left. Kess took her belt again, looped it around his wrists, and cinched them together in front of her own stomach, tying him to her the only way that would actually hold. "Don't let go," she yelled over her shoulder, and hit the ignition. The engine roared to life, and they shot out from beneath the overpass into the driving rain. The ride afterward blurred into neon streaks and freezing wind. Kess pushed the bike harder than she had in years, running 3 red lights, laying on the horn, narrowly missing a garbage truck that jackknifed it to a stop and sent a wall of water crashing over them both. Every bump, every gear change, she felt him flinch against her back, felt his blood soaking through her jacket, running down her side. Stay awake, she thought, jaw locked. Don't die on my bike. County General appeared on the hill like a lit beacon. She didn't bother with the parking lot. She jumped the curb, roaring up the pedestrian ramp straight toward the emergency room doors, tires shrieking as she slammed the brakes inches from the glass. She killed the engine. The silence afterward rang in her ears. She unbuckled the belt, slid off the bike, and caught Theo as he collapsed sideways, scooping him up against her chest. He was pale as chalk, lips already turning blue. She kicked the automatic doors hard enough to knock them off their track. The ER waiting room went dead silent the moment she stepped through, a chaotic mix of late-night misery frozen mid-motion, drunks and exhausted nurses, and coughing children all turning at once. Kess stood there soaked through, blood to her elbows, blood down her chest, a leather cut with a wolf's head patch stitched. "I need a doctor," she said, and the words carried through the whole room. A triage nurse froze behind the glass. 2 security guards near the far wall dropped their coffee cups and reached for their belts, faces draining pale. "Drop him," one of the guards barked, already unclipping his mace. "Get away from the officer." Kess didn't blink. She walked straight past him toward the trauma ward doors. He shot in the gut. "Get a damn gurney. If a story like this one has you leaning in already, take a second to hit that like button. It costs nothing, and it helps a channel like this one keep telling stories exactly like it." The paralysis broke all at once. A doctor in blue scrubs burst through with a gurney, and Kess laid Theo down as gently as her adrenaline allowed. His hand found a weak fistful of her jacket, held for one long second, his eyes locking onto hers, and then let go as they wheeled him down the hall. "Pulse is threading," the doctor shouted. "Call surgery, get Oneg on standby." Kess stood in the hallway, chest heaving, watching the doors swing shut. She looked down at her hands, already drying stiff with someone else's blood in the sterile air conditioning. She didn't run. She walked to the nearest wall, slid down it until she was sitting on the linoleum, and waited. It took 7 minutes for the police to arrive. The front doors didn't open so much as get breached, half a dozen uniforms flooding in, hands on holsters, eyes sweeping the room. Behind them came a detective in a rumpled coat, 20 years on the job written into every line of his exhausted face. His name was Robert Calder, and Theo had been his rookie for the past 11 months, the closest thing to a kid Brother Calder had in this life. Calder's eyes found Kess sitting against the wall, blood-soaked, the wolf patch clear across her back, and he didn't ask a single question. He crossed the room in 3 strides, hauled her up by the front of her cut, and slammed her against the concrete. "What did you do to him?" he snarled, pressing his service weapon under her jaw. A dozen barrels came up around them, safeties clicking off in a wave. Kess didn't flinch. She looked down the length of Calder's gun, then met his eyes, red-rimmed with grief and fury in equal measure. "I brought him here," she said quietly. His finger twitched against the trigger. "Where is he?" "Surgery," she said, voice level. "You're wasting time, Badge. He needs a blood donor. I'm out of clean shirts to offer." The standoff held a full 10 seconds, a hair's width from becoming something none of them could take back. "Back off," a new voice snapped. Not a cop, an older triage nurse in coffee-stained scrubs, wedging herself bodily between the gun and Kess's chest without a flicker of hesitation. She'd worked graveyard shift in the worst ER in the city for 2 decades. She'd seen more blood than half the officers in that lobby combined. "Get that weapon out of my lobby, detective. You want to shoot her? Take it to the parking lot. Otherwise, cuff her and clear out. We have trauma coming through those doors." Calder's breathing was ragged, the adrenaline still screaming under his skin. Slowly, he lowered the gun, though he didn't holster it. He spun Kess around and shoved her face first into the wall, cuffing her 2 notches tighter than necessary, making his point the only way pride would let him. She let it happen without resistance. They put her in the back of a cruiser and drove her to the precinct in silence. Subscribe to Legendary Veterans, because what Kess says in that interrogation room over the next several hours is the reason nobody at that precinct ever looked at a stranger the same way again. They skipped the drunk tank and took her straight to a windowless interrogation room on the 3rd floor. Steel table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs, a camera blinking red in the corner. Calder came in 10 minutes later with a manila folder and a coffee that smelled burnt. He threw the folder down hard enough to crack against the metal, sat across from her, and didn't touch the cup. "His name is Officer Theo Marsh," Calder said, voice a low, dangerous gravel. 23 years old, 11 months on the street. He's in surgery right now with a severed hepatic artery. Surgeon gives him a 1 in 5 shot of seeing sunrise. Kess looked at the wall behind him. She didn't offer sympathy. Sympathy from someone in her jacket would only land as an insult. "You want to explain," Calder said, leaning forward, "why a patch member of the Iron Wolves, someone with a rap sheet longer than my arm, is the one who dragged him in here?" "I found him," Kess said, "under the 4th Street overpass." Calder's laugh was short and humorless. "Bullshit. That's not on his patrol route, and it sure isn't a place a rookie writes parking tickets at 3 in the morning. Maybe ask his dispatch why he was there. Or why he was alone," Kess said. Calder's jaw tightened, the muscle working visibly. "Don't play detective with me. I know your chapter. I know you run parts through the docks. I know you've got history with the Kilbane crew on the north side. My guess is your people caught him in the middle of something and decided a dead cop was cheaper than a witness." Kess leaned forward, the cuffs rattling against the table. "If I'd shot him," she said, voice dropping low, "he'd be dead in that alley. I wouldn't have wrecked a good belt trying to stop the bleeding. I wouldn't have burned 3 red lights getting him to your front door. I'd have put a 2nd round in him and gone home to sleep." Calder's fist hit the table. "Then who shot him?" "I don't know," Kess said, "but they knew he was coming." Calder went still. The anger in his eyes flickered, replaced by something sharper. "What do you mean?" "The cruiser was wrapped around a support pillar," Kess said, slow and deliberate, letting the details settle. "Front end totaled, but the bullet holes were all grouped tight on the driver's side windshield. That's not a moving shooter spraying wild. That's someone who was waiting. They boxed him in, forced him into that pillar, and then they walked up and finished it." The room went silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. "He was terrified," Kess added quietly. "Not just because he was dying. Because he knew he'd been set up. He was gripping a scrap of radio wire like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Ask yourself, detective, who sends a rookie into an industrial dead zone alone, with a radio that conveniently doesn't work?" Calder stared down at his coffee for a long minute, the gears behind his eyes visibly grinding from blind grief towards something colder and more procedural. He knew his own department. He knew exactly which corners of it had gone soft in the wrong places. He stood, gathered the folder and the coffee, and said only, "Sit tight." "Do I have a choice?" Kes asked dryly. He didn't answer. The door slammed shut behind him. She sat in that room for 9 hours. Nobody brought food or water. The cold worked its way into her joints, her neck aching from the angle of the chair, and she watched dust drift under the harsh fluorescent light with nothing else to do but wait and wonder if the boy she'd tied to her back was already dead. Somewhere around hour 6, the camera in the corner clicked off, and a different officer entered briefly, younger than Calder, with the specific nervous energy of someone sent to check on a prisoner without being given a reason why it mattered. He set a bottle of water on the table without a word and left again before Kes could say anything back. She drank it slowly, watching the door, wondering what that small, unexplained kindness meant about how the mood in the building had shifted since Calder first slammed her against the wall. At noon, the door finally opened. Not Calder, a young uniformed officer, nervous, hand hovering near his own sidearm, holding a small key. He came around behind her, unlocked the cuffs, and she brought her arms forward, wrists ringed dark purple, working feeling back into her fingers. "Stand up," he said, voice cracking slightly. She stood. She towered over him. Neither of them spoke as he walked her out of the room, down a long hallway, and into the main bullpen. The room was packed, dozens of officers at desks, phones, paperwork, the ordinary churn of a precinct at midday. But as Kes stepped through the door, the noise died in a wave that started near the entrance and rolled all the way to the back wall. Typewriters stopped. Calls were put on hold. Chairs turned. She walked the center aisle feeling the weight of every set of eyes in the room. Chin level, posture straight. She was an outlaw standing in the belly of the machine that hated everything her jacket represented. They hated her. She'd been raised to hate them back. That was simply the order of things. But today the air in that room didn't feel like hatred. It felt like something heavier. Calder waited at the front desk, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 9 hours. Tie loose, shirt wrinkled, eyes bloodshot. He held a clear evidence bag with her belt inside it. "He made it," Calder said, voice hoarse. Kes stopped. She didn't smile. She gave a slow, barely visible nod. "Good." Surgeon said he had maybe 2 minutes left in him when they got him on the table. If you'd waited on an ambulance, he'd be in the morgue right now. Calder swallowed hard, looking down at the counter. "We pulled the dispatch logs. Somebody in narcotics used an encrypted channel to send him to 4th Street on a fake officer down call. They lured him in." "You find out who?" Kes asked. "We will," Calder said, flat and cold. "Internal Affairs is already tearing the building apart. We found the shooter's car abandoned in a scrapyard an hour ago. Matches a vehicle a cartel crew has been running for months. The same crew narcotics was supposed to be watching. A dirty cop." Kes had seen that particular rot before. The badge never made anyone righteous. It just gave the wrong people better cover. Calder slid the evidence bag across the counter. "Your belt. We kept his clothes for evidence, but this is yours. You're free to go. No charges." She took the bag. "Appreciate it." She turned to leave. "Larrabee," Calder called after her. She paused, glancing back. "Why'd you do it?" he asked, and for the first time all night the question came stripped of every trace of cop bravado. Just a man who genuinely wanted to understand. "You hate us. Your whole club hates us. You could have ridden right past that overpass and nobody would have known the difference. Why stop?" Kes looked at him, then at the room full of officers still watching in silence. "Because a dying kid in the mud isn't a cop," she said. "He's just a dying kid." She didn't wait for a response. She pushed through the glass doors and stepped out into afternoon air that smelled like rain-washed concrete. The storm finally passed, the sky pale and overcast above the precinct steps. Her bike was parked at the bottom, impounded and released, keys sitting in the ignition like someone had decided the paperwork wasn't worth the trouble. She swung her leg over the saddle, tied her belt back around her waist, and reached for the ignition. That was when she heard the doors open behind her again. She looked back. Officers were filing out onto the precinct steps. Uniforms, detectives, desk sergeants, dozens of them, none of them speaking. Calder stood at the center, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. There were no salutes. Nobody clapped. They didn't suddenly like her, and she didn't suddenly respect the badge. That line was still drawn exactly where it had always been drawn, in concrete and blood, and 15 years of history neither side was going to forget by sundown. But as she kicked the engine over and the V-twin roared to life against the brick facade of the precinct, every single one of them just stood there and watched her go. A silent wall of blue, offering the only kind of acknowledgement either side actually had language for. Kes didn't wave. She rolled the throttle back and rode out into the wet streets, wind cutting the smell of hospital and precinct and blood off her skin. And somewhere 3 miles from the station, she finally let herself exhale all the way. She rode past that same overpass every week for the rest of her life, and every single time, without exception, some part of her checked the shadows beneath it before she passed through. She never found anyone else down there. She kept checking anyway. Some things you can't unlearn once your body decides they matter. Word of what happened that night moved through both worlds in the specific, quiet way stories like it always do. Never fully confirmed, never fully denied. Repeated at biker bars and cop bars alike, with just enough detail changed each time that nobody could say for certain anymore exactly how much of it was true. Kes never corrected any version of it. She figured the story wasn't really hers to control anymore, not once it had left that hospital lobby. Theo Marsh recovered slowly, over the better part of a year, and returned to patrol duty eventually, though not on the same beat. He never spoke publicly about the night under the overpass, but he kept, folded in his wallet behind his badge where nobody but him ever saw it, a small torn scrap of worn leather belt, the same one that had been cinched around his wrists on the back of a stranger's motorcycle in the pouring rain. He never explained it to anyone who asked. He didn't think an explanation would survive translation into words that meant anything to someone who hadn't been there. Calder retired 4 years later, and at his retirement dinner, when a younger officer asked him what the strangest case of his career had been, he thought about it for a long moment before answering, and then told the room, simply, that it wasn't a case at all. It was a woman in a leather jacket who'd taught him more about the actual meaning of the badge in one interrogation room conversation than 2 decades on the job had managed on its own. Some lines get drawn in ink. Some get stitched into patches worn on someone's back for the rest of their life. But the ones that matter most, the ones that actually decide what a person does when nobody's watching and every incentive points toward riding away, those get carved somewhere deeper than either side of that line ever fully explains to the other. If this story kept you here until the very last word, share it with someone who needs a reminder that the line between outlaw and hero was never as clean as either side likes to pretend. That's the whole reason stories like this one get told at all.